Hi guys, it is me, Jacqueline. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. I do want to quickly acknowledge a few things before we jump right on into this book review. I didn't know if I wanted to do a separate video on it, but I have found that reading has been a really great coping mechanism with what is going on in the world today. I do want to acknowledge, obviously, the lives we have lost and the people that are currently suffering and will be suffering, and families that are suffering, and that is something that I don't think any single one of us currently watching this video, currently experiencing it, whatever, we can never not see or feel or think about. But I think this is a great way for us to kind of build strength, build the hope, and build the faith. So I have found that reading has been kind of my refuge, and I hope you guys don't mind that I will be kind of putting out a lot more content. I'm going to be watching so much more too. I am definitely going to be self-isolating myself, and I think that is the best and only thing we really can do, along with praying and obviously keeping our immune systems up. And hopefully time will tell what will happen, but yet again, having hope and faith is the only thing we can do. For today's video, like I said, I will be reviewing The Shadows Between Us from Tricia Levenseller. This is a young adult fantasy novel. It came out in February, I believe end of February, like 25th of 2020. I have honestly been so excited to read this book. I'm really happy I actually did get to finish it. This was an author that I have experienced before. I read her debut novel, Daughter of a Pirate King, and that duology, and I really love the duology. The second book was like amazing in my opinion. She was someone that I definitely wanted to keep an eye out for, so when I read this synopsis and heard this book was coming out, I knew I wanted to read it, and I'm so glad I finally did do that. I did give it a 4 to 5 stars. This is such a conflicting book for me. I keep going back and forth between like a 3.5 and a 4 out of 5 stars, excuse me. It's one of those books that I feel like every time I think about it, or if I were to reread it, I would get a different rating from it just because there are so many different factors. So this will be a non-spoilery book review. I'm going to explain what it's about, the pros, the cons, and yeah, if you have read it though and want to discuss it, please make sure you put a little spoiler alert in the comments down below, and we can of course have a discussion. I love talking about books with you guys, but this will be a spoiler-free review. In this book, we follow our anti-hero, Alessandra, as she is inevitably trying to woo the king, marry the king, and then kill the king. This was all I really knew going into the book. I had no real knowledge besides the king is called the Shadow King, and yet again, this was a fantasy novel, so I was kind of thinking that I had to do something with the king. In this book, we do follow Alessandra, like I said, and she is an anti-hero. She is someone that I found at first was harder to like than love, but I found over the duration I really did see her in a different light. This was something that I knew was going to be more political and courtship based, and I really enjoyed that about this book. I enjoyed the fact it wasn't entirely about the romance, but obviously the romance is a huge factor as well. I know the summary isn't the best summary, but this was literally all I knew before going into this book, and I do feel like this book really does take you along the journey, and you don't really need to know too much when it comes to it. Let's talk about the characters. So why this was a very conflicting book for me and kind of harder for me to figure out what exactly I would rate it is the characters and the beginning kind of first like 5-ish chapters had me viewing this book in a different light. Like I said, Alessandra is a very anti-heroist or heroine character. She has these inevitably flawed things about her that makes her herself, but she's nonconformist. She doesn't really fit into a certain space. She does have this drive and this sort of almost selfish implication on how she's going to ultimately get her way when it comes about doing things. So her plan, which is to eventually kill the king, is kind of a calculated scheme. She really does take in this kind of role where she is consistently looking and calculated. I think this is a very interesting quality of her. This was something that was kind of insightful throughout the book, definitely something I saw throughout the book. It's funny enough because I just read one of my favorite books and read its sequel, and I found that I could see some parallels between these stories. What I found to be very different between this book and the other book I'm mentioning is Alessandra. Alessandra is those characters, or one of those characters, that at first when I started this book, I really didn't like. And it wasn't that I found that I couldn't really love those characters that I hated. It was one of those characters that I just didn't really understand the intentions behind it. I really did have the deeper into the story and really get to read, and eventually when I saw her interacting, really get to see more of her characters in when it comes to other characters, I really got to see her true personality. She ultimately did show all of the readers from her perspective, her entire personality, but it's the parts of the personalities that I personally didn't love that kind of started off this book, and eventually when we dove deeper into the book, I started to really enjoy her character. And I can't help but also root for her at the same time, even if it is in the end very different what happens in the end compared to what kind of the game plan is in the beginning. It's still something that ultimately I enjoyed kind of following her story throughout. Now, another character that I really wanted a little bit more from is her romantic interest, the Shadow King. I don't really think that's a spoiler. I think that kind of can be implemented when it comes to her obviously trying to woo and marry the king. I really did enjoy his character. I found at first he was someone we didn't really know a lot about, and I kind of had some predictability when it came to his character and some things that ended up happening. I did kind of predict it through and through. But his character, specifically the fantastical elements involved, was something I really wanted more of and wanted to learn more of, because that made this book super different for me. I found that this was, yes, a romance sort of emphasis plot, but a lot of it had to do with the court. So like I said, this was very much a kind of politically court-driven story. I think the romance definitely was the huge part of it, but I think inevitably the courtship and the court world itself was a huge factor. It really did rule so much of the plot development. I really did enjoy it. I did want to see more of the world itself. I did feel like we only really got to see the court, and I felt like there were countries or certain phrases thrown that not that I didn't understand, because eventually they were told, but I just wanted to see more of. I wanted more of a wider spectrum on this kind of smaller story that we saw in a huge wider world. I mean, the ending is one of those endings that I can ultimately see it as being a standalone. It very much is a non-cliffhanger ending, but I would love to see maybe more of this world. This is something that did held a lot of intriguement for me, and I did want to see what more she could do with either the characters involved or the world itself. Now, characters, speaking of characters, we have obviously the ones that I've mentioned. I know I haven't really talked a lot about the king, but I feel like the king is something you get to learn as you read the story, and I don't really want to give too much away. His character is very alike to Alessandra, and that's how I feel like both of these flourish, because they are very much equals, and that is something that I found that both characters struggled to find, but they found that in each other. Now, other characters involved, ones that Alessandra finds in the court, I found it to be really exciting to see these characters. We have some female friendships, which I love seeing female friendships, and I love seeing these characters actually have their own plots and stories as well. It makes it so much more exciting than just seeing our solitary character having these plots, and seeing other characters and her involvement in these other characters' lives. I did have a favorite friend, I'm not gonna lie, but it was just super exciting to see those different sides of our main character through her interactions with these friendships. And that's ultimately what I really enjoyed about them, is they allowed us to see different parts of our main character from her interactions with them. So I really enjoyed that. I think ultimately why I find this book to be really hard for me to give a full on 5 out of 5 star or something with is I felt like the beginning was a little bit we needed to break into when it came to me. It was ultimately like this shift happened where I looked at this book in a different light, and I actually found to really enjoy it for what it gave me. I felt a little bit maybe that I had the book that I just read, which featured a not exact dynamic, a very similar dynamic where someone is infiltrated into a court and she is ultimately trying to kill, or in that case is steal, the king's heart or the prince's heart. So it was hard for me to not see parallels between these two, but ultimately this book is entirely itself with things like the fantastical elements, the courtships, and the plots involved, and these characters are so uniquely themselves that it really did fly off the page. I still feel like I would give it a 4 to 5 stars. Like I still, even talking about this, I know I'm like, and it is one of those stories that I know I can't ultimately give a 5, even though I did really enjoy it, especially towards the end and everything, like how it kind of came to be. The word predictability elements for me, I did see some things way in advance that it was going to happen. This was a book that I flew through, and I really did love it for what it gave, which was really unique characters, a romance that really did build on itself, and the court and political dynamics. Those are things that I love in the stories, and specifically this story did them very well. Some things that I didn't like, I'm just going to summarize. The beginning I found to be a little bit slow. I wish for more of a world building element, and I also wish a little bit more from our characters that we did get, these secondary characters. I always do want more when it comes to characters. Characters are like my favorite thing, but these did have some great ones, especially our main characters we get to see the majority of our attention with, which makes sense. I would love to see everyone's opinions on this book, because I think this is one of those books that either people love it or people hate it, and it's funny because I am definitely an in-between. I can definitely picture myself rereading this book and seeing it in a different light, but it is one of those stories that's so hard for me to pinpoint like exactly what I would give. Like maybe even after I do this review and I really think on it, I would give it a 3 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is one of those books that I keep like going back and forth between the rating, but for now I'm going to give it a 4 to 5 stars. I will see you guys in my next video. Don't forget to subscribe and like this, and also comment if you have read this book, if you've been interested in this book. I will be having more videos coming out soon, and I will see you guys in those. Bye!